Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. Who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And what he do? And it's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another late-breaking episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts. I'm Bruce Rivers, board-certified criminal defense lawyer, here with our content genius, Michael Rivers, behind the camera as we speak. Today, we're reacting to the opening statements for Melly. Now, let's talk a little bit about Melly, but before we do that, this is brought to you by eSign.com. eSign.com, a very effective way to remotely do business. So, for example, let's say your grandfather's in your basement and he's got a new record deal, but he thinks he's a cool rapper. Well, guess what? He signs a deal with eSign.com. You download the app, you get 3 free signatures a month, and oh, look, there's his ride's here now. Yeah, his ride's here now. So I use it all the time for retainer agreements when my client can't make it to the office or they're out of state. eSign.com, a very effective way to remotely and quickly do business to secure the deal. All right, let's talk about Melly. YNW Melly is accused of killing Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr., setting it up like a staged drive-by. The only issue, as I saw it, was the bullets from the drive-by supposedly are going one direction, and the ones that killed the two guys in the front seat were going the other way. They selected a jury, and keep in mind, he's 24 now. He's been in custody since he was 19 years old, almost 5 years. He's looking at the death penalty. When he first started this case, way back when, he used to have a unanimous verdict of recommendation for the death penalty. Now, because of our wise and incredible governor in Florida, you only need 8 out of 12 to say that the death penalty is okay. You know, first of all, I am totally against the death penalty. I'm against government-sponsored killing. I think it's not equally applied. You know, somebody who doesn't have means. Now, he does have means, but I bet his money is running out. You've got a situation where you're seeking the highest penalty you could possibly extract from a human being. That is their life. And you're gonna, in order to get a guilty verdict, you need a unanimous verdict, 12 out of 12. You know, even if there's one holdup, that's a hung jury. That's not a not guilty. So, you know, people say, oh, you only need to convince one. Well, that's for a hung jury. You know, you need to convince all 12, either way, guilty or not guilty. So what really bothers me is that you've got the highest penalty, and then, you know, that's just like a clear and convincing standard, really. You know, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt by any means. So let's get into this. We're going to watch the closing arguments, and we'll make some comments. Closing fucking A. We're going to watch the opening statements. And, you know, the opening statement is a time where you don't argue your case. You can't argue your case. But you can say this is what the evidence will show. Basically, to give the audience a preview as to what the evidence is going to show.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. On October 26th of 2018, this defendant shot and killed 2 of his friends. He killed Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to set out the story and how this unfolded and lay out what I expect the evidence will show during the course of this trial. First thing you are going to hear is that at 4:35 a.m. on October 26th of 2018, Cortland Henry, the co-defendant, shows up at Memorial Miramar Hospital. In his car, he has 2 dead bodies.
So you see, she gets right into it. And she's not looking at any notes. She's looking right at the audience. This is very effective.
In the front passenger seat is Anthony Williams. In the rear passenger seat is Christopher Thomas. They are dead, they are riddled with bullets, and the car is full of blood.
Now, if you remember, that's right. I think when in my opening I said something about, you know, them both being in the front seat, but you've got, I think Borland was driving, and the other 2 passengers were the ones that were killed. And if you remember, I believe that Melly was sitting in the rear driver's side seat, which tells you the bullets came from left to right, and the bullets from the supposed drive-by were coming in right to left. That's important.
Christopher Thomas is sitting in the rear. There is multiple defects to his body. Anthony Williams, who is sitting in the front,
Defects to the body is another way of saying gunshot wounds.
has 2 major injuries. Officer Jessica Amangor is working a detail at the hospital. Cortland Henry runs in, starts telling a story about a drive-by. Quote unquote, drive-by.
Now, if you remember, Cortland Henry is actually, he's not in custody. He was released while this is pending. He's going to be testifying. I guarantee you he's going to testify in this trial. I'd be shocked if he wasn't.
Cortland Henry, and you're going to learn a lot about Miramar geography during the course of this trial, tells a story that he and his buddies, just the 2 that are in the car, were at a music studio here in downtown Fort Lauderdale at 805 Northeast 4th Avenue. He's going to tell law enforcement, and you're going to hear this statement. You're going to hear the actual audio of him telling law enforcement.
You're going to hear the statement of him telling law enforcement. What does that tell you? He's not being tried with Melly. This is Melly's trial. So if you're going to hear that statement, the only way that comes in is if Cortland Henry testifies himself. So I said, you watch my prior videos on this. I said all along that Henry is going to be a snitch, and that's YNW Portland.
We were at the recording studio. We drove home because they lived out in West Miramar. You're going to hear Cortland say that they come across in the path of travel, that they're getting off the highway on I-75 southbound to go west on Miramar Parkway. 160th, which is also commonly referred to as Dykes Road, and 172nd, Cortland Henry says they were shot at. That he ducked down, and you'll see him doing that in the video, and that he didn't see any car, he didn't see any people, he has no information, and that he quickly went to the nearest hospital. So you're going to learn that when you go on Miramar Parkway and you take that right at 172, Memorial Miramar is just about 1 mile north. So the distance between most major intersections in Broward County is 1 mile. So you're going to learn that from 160th to 172nd, 1 mile.
And here's the thing. When you're making up a story on the fly like this, you're not thinking about these details. These details, like the trajectory of the bullets, or the proximity of the hospital to where you are, or some of the other things that they know they can track.
From 172nd to the next major intersection on Miramar Parkway, 184th, 1 mile. So you're going to hear and find that Mr. Henry's statement that the car is traveling westbound on Memorial Parkway, then goes north on 172nd and shows up at the hospital for the drive-by is completely and utterly false. How can I tell you that, ladies and gentlemen? Well, the detectives from Miramar at this point shut down the entire length of Miramar Parkway from 160th to 172nd. And they sit and they walk side by side for an hour, that mile-long stretch, looking for evidence of this drive-by. Because evidence is the remnants a crime leaves behind.
And what kind of evidence would you be looking for? Well, tire tracks for one. You would also be looking for shell casings. And if you had a revolver, you wouldn't leave shell casings. But if you had a semi-automatic, you probably would.
And in this case, the lack of evidence is very important. There is a lack of any evidence whatsoever to support that a drive-by happened on Miramar Parkway.
And just like evidence shows something, the lack of it certainly shows something as well. The silence, that lack of evidence, it can be deafening. And if the lack of evidence doesn't jive with the statement that Portland Henry told, or YNW Portland, that shows you that the statement is likely false.
What would they look for? Shell casings, glass fragments, projectiles, tire marks. You're going to hear that there is none of that found whatsoever. So then they said, well, maybe we have the time frame wrong. Maybe we have the location wrong. So they walk an additional mile from 172 to 184th. Still nothing. No broken glass, no projectiles, no fire casings. Detectives know they have a Jeep that they are looking at the Memorial Miramar Hospital that has 16 easily identifiable bullet defects, that has a broken out rear view window and 2 broken side windows on the passenger side. Things aren't adding up. So detectives work backwards. They are then able to determine that 805 Northeast 4th address, that it's a recording studio, and that the recording studio is equipped with cameras.
So when you are crafting your story on the fly, which just sort of seems like that Borland did, Cortland Henry, you're not thinking about the cameras. You're not thinking about your GPS location. You're thinking just very superficially.
And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to see footage from both inside and outside of that recording studio. You're going to learn that on the morning of the 26th at approximately 1 p.m., detectives went out to the recording studio to try and see if somebody had followed the victims, to find out how they knew where they were going to be to set up this drive-by.
And here's the other thing. So there's cameras there, but you know what? In most neighborhoods now, there's cameras everywhere.
In the video, that is the first time detectives learned that there was actually 4 people in that gray Jeep, and that the defendant, Jamel Demons, is in the rear driver's side seat. So let me set the scene for you at the recording studio, because there's actually 8 young men there. You're going to hear they arrived at the recording studio, not much was getting done. They were tired. They left at 3:19, and they got into 2 vehicles.
You know, I had heard somewhere that this opening statement by the state was pretty weak. I couldn't disagree more. I think she's got a command of the facts. She's not going crazy with her mannerisms or, this must be, the fire and brimstone bullshit. She seems pretty matter of fact.
So first vehicle is a red Mitsubishi SUV. In that red Mitsubishi SUV, 4 individuals get into it. Travion Glass, Dontavius Withers, Jacoby Mills, and Adrian Davis. They are in the red Mitsubishi. In the gray Jeep, you have the driver, Cortland Henry, rear driver's side passenger, Jamel Demons, Anthony Williams in the front seat, and Cortland Henry, again, with the driver, Christopher Thomas, in the rear. What you will find and what you will hear, ladies and gentlemen, is that this gray Jeep leaves the recording studio, goes over to I-95, takes I-95 south to 595, 595 across to I-75 south.
And how do they know that?
I-75 south to Miramar Parkway. You're going to see traffic cameras from the Department of Transportation that show the cars going across 595, one after the other.
And you don't think about that when you're making a story up on the fly or when you're 19.
In those videos, you're not going to see them stop. And it's just a small portion of which is covered by cameras on that. But then what you're going to see is the cell phone evidence.
Like I said, we leave a digital footprint everywhere we go. Your cell phone tracks you wherever you go. The cameras are, and they're super accurate. Like, I mean, the GPS is within a block or two, if that. The cameras are, just more corroborative evidence of what's going to be highlighted on the cell phone tower records.
The digital leash. The item that is carried around in everyone's pocket, in everyone's car, you use on a daily basis. Because you're going to see, as Jamel Demons leaves that recording studio, he's got his phone in his hand, and he's playing on his phone. You're going to see on that phone information that Anthony Williams had his phone with him. And the interesting fact that's important to keep in mind is Anthony Williams, the deceased in the front passenger seat, and Jamel Demons, who is the shooter, in the
No, she said demons, now she says demons.
rear driver's side passenger seat, have the exact same make and model of cell phone. Not only do they have the same make and model of cell phone, they are on the exact same cell phone plan.
Which makes it nice and easy for the detectives to get the records. So one of the things they have to do is they have to issue a warrant or a subpoena for the cell phone records. And so if they only have to do one for both, it's the same carrier and same plan, so it's pretty easy to get. And when you look at these towers, have you ever noticed that a cell phone tower has 3 sides? And it's to triangulate exactly where your location is. And your GPS is pretty accurate.
Using the same service, the same cell towers, everything like that. So you can compare the information from those 2 cell phones and see how they track together. Christopher Thomas, who's the deceased in the rear passenger seat, he had an iPhone as well, and he was on the Sprint service at the time. In the other car, that red Mitsubishi, Dontavius Withers also had a Sprint service cell phone. So, ladies and gentlemen, you have individuals in 2 cars and all of the cell phone tracks together, going across 595, going until they get to Miramar Parkway and 184th. At 184th, the red Mitsubishi goes south, and you will then see it at 3:50 a.m. going through the guard gate at Sunset Lakes. That was the gated community in which the individuals were all living at the time of this homicide in October of 2018. On the Sunset Lakes guard video, the red Mitsubishi goes through, the gray Jeep doesn't. The gray Jeep instead goes north and then proceeds to go to the actual scene of the homicides. The gray Jeep goes north on 184th up to Pines Boulevard.
They know exactly where it went, exactly what time, and exactly the route. This is why to do anything like this is just foolhardy, because detectives are now taskmasters at the digital leash, as she called it.
From Pines Boulevard, it travels west all the way to the edge of the Everglades, where it is desolate, where it is dark, where there are no witnesses. The gray Jeep goes down south on US 27 and turns left on Pembroke Road. You're going to learn that Pembroke Road does not connect through. That right there, Pembroke Road dead ends at a trash facility. That at that recycling facility, you're not going to see people. You're not going to see activity. There's no street lights. And at 4:02 a.m., Jamel Demons exits that vehicle and stages that driveway. Because, ladies and gentlemen, remember, at this time, Miramar is going and working backwards. They're looking for communication to figure out how and why and how the location of this Jeep was known, why they would be targeted. At that point, there is no communication. You're not going to see any sort of phone calls, any sort of text messages going out, setting up any sort of meeting at the edge of the Everglades at 4 in the morning. What you are going to find is that after the surveillance footage is brought up, some of these other individuals say, oh no, we stopped. We stopped the car and Mr. Dimmons on the side of the highway got out of the gray Jeep and got into the red Mitsubishi. But ladies and gentlemen, it's important to know and look at the details, because the details don't match up. One person says, oh, it's at this location. One person says it's over here on the side of the road.
And here's the other thing. Once you get taken into custody, you know, one person's saying one thing, one person's saying another thing. Nobody's got their story straight. And now they're getting, it doesn't, their stories don't jive with what the evidence is.
Look at what the physical evidence shows, and that's what I would suggest to you is the most reliable things. So on the physical evidence, the Jeep is towed to the Miramar substation, and a search warrant is executed on it. And at that point, officers, crime scene technicians, and investigators start going through the contents of the Jeep. And all of the ballistic from the drive-by are all coming from the passenger side in towards the driver's side.
Right to left.
And then from the rear of the vehicle, forwards towards the front. The medical examiner's office is also conducting an investigation. You're going to hear testimony about the autopsies that were conducted on Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas. And this is
the trajectory of the bullets and the entry and exit wounds for the bodies are one of the most telling things, because they all came from one spot.
This is when the suspicion, the investigation takes a turn. Because at that point, the fatal wounds for Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams are coming from inside the vehicle, from the rear driver's side passenger going out towards the passenger side. The other interesting thing the medical examiner's office is going to tell you is that when the drive-by was staged at 4:02 a.m., the victims were already dead. The medical examiner will be able to testify and tell you that the fatal shots to Anthony Williams, to his head, that enters in the back of his head and exits at the top, blowing out the front passenger window, was fatal. And that the additional wounds that are consistent with the trajectories going through the vehicle, he's already dead. They are post-mortem inflicted gunshot wounds.
How do they know that? I'll tell you how they know that. They know that because the wound doesn't bleed. And why doesn't the wound bleed? The wound doesn't bleed because there's no blood flowing at the time. The heart's not pumping.
The same for Christopher Thomas. You will hear from the medical examiners, Dr. McDougall and Dr. Souter, who conducted the autopsies, that Christopher Thomas was shot in his left cheek. That was the fatal shot for him. You're also going to hear about stippling. Stippling is unburnt gunpowder that's ejected from the front of a firearm when a bullet is fired.
In our previous video, we talked a little bit about stippling, and stippling can give you a hint as to how close the gun was away from the injury.
The best way to describe that and make it easy to understand, you have a handful of sand, soot, and a golf ball. You throw it, the golf ball is going to go the furthest because it has the most weight, the most mass. The sand weighs a little bit more than the soot, so it's going to go a little bit further, but not as far as the golf ball. The ash, the soot, which has almost no weight, no mass, therefore it can't have any energy put into it, falls very quickly. So that is the same principle that comes to gunshot residue and the powder tattooing that you're going to hear about, the stippling.
So it means that it couldn't have been outside the vehicle.
The bullet travels the furthest. The gunshot residue, the powder tattooing, the stippling, creates a pattern. And from that pattern, the medical examiner's office can give an approximate distance. Why can they not give an exact one? Because their firearm in this case was never recovered. Law enforcement made diligent efforts to go and dive multiple canals, search multiple areas, apartments, storage units. They were never able to find the firearm. So without the actual firearm that was used in this case, you can't accurately and reliably recreate a distance determination.
This issue probably would have been litigated beforehand to limit the testimony of the medical examiner on that issue. So when she's saying you can't reliably tell, that is definitely going to be something the defense is going to harp on.
Common sense, ladies and gentlemen. The things that you learned in elementary school science about conducting science experiments, they apply just as much now as they did then. You have to minimize the number of variables. That's the only way to get an accurate experiment. So if you don't know the type of gun, you can't minimize the variables to get that distance determination.
But they do have the caliber.
So what you're also going to hear is while law enforcement is going through that Jeep, they find one spent shell casing.
And if the shots were fired from outside the vehicle, you would not expect to see a shell casing inside the vehicle.
For a .40 caliber firearm. Why is that important? That shows a gun was fired inside of that car.
So we know that more than one shot was fired inside the vehicle, right? And so where are the other shell casings? So that is going to be an issue of contention for the defense. And one would argue that, they concocted this story and they tried to clean it all up, but they missed one.
You're going to hear that at once the location of US 27 and Pembroke Road was discovered, law enforcement goes out to that area as well. And there they locate an additional 8 shell casings, .40 caliber. But the interesting thing about that doesn't happen on October 26th of 2018. This happens on November 21st, almost a month later. Because that's when law enforcement gets the reliable cell phone tracking data that they use to determine that's the area that they need to be searching.
So they use that tracking data. They go to the scene where, they follow the steps or the path. They find these shell casings. And one of the things that they're going to do is look at, where it was struck on the firing pin. That will give you, I think they can tell you that it's been fired from the same firearm.
Because at that location is where the cell phones of Christopher Thomas, Anthony Williams, and Jamel Demmons all line up at 4:02 a.m. That point, afterwards, Mr. Demmons' phone tracks with the 2 victims until about 4:20. So 15 minutes before Cortland Henry takes the victims to the hospital. During those 30 minutes, you're going to hear as to where the path went. You're going to hear that law enforcement then searched that path again looking for trace evidence, such as firearms. They didn't find it. But you're also going to hear that Jamel Demmons, on the side of the road, made a FaceTime video chat.
Remember what I said about self-snitching?
At that point, he starts setting up the story. He FaceTimes his girlfriend at the time, Mariah Hamilton. Mariah Hamilton gets the phone call and screams waking up her mother, Felicia Holmes. Felicia Holmes also sees the defendant, Jamel Demons, on that FaceTime video call. And you're going to learn, ladies and gentlemen, that that's a data event on a cell phone. That it's not a call for the purposes of the cell phone companies. It's using data, accessing the internet. Felicia Holmes and Mariah Hamilton see Jamel Demons outside, and he is saying he's just been involved in a drive-by, and he thinks Anthony Williams and Chris Thomas are dead. So what you're also going to find out is while Mr. Demons is out there on the side of the road, 4 in the morning, 4:42 specifically, he sends a drop pin, digital homing beacon, to his current location to one of his friends, Frederick Givens. Frederick Givens is also involved in the music industry, and he asked to be picked up. Frederick Givens, then, about 11 minutes later, is sent another drop pin where Mr. Demons has moved a couple of meters.
So these are, the reason this is important is because the drop pin, the Facebook call, the cell tower records, the videos, it all fits together and creates a picture.
What you're going to find out as well, though, is these digital leashes, they have more than just phone calls, accessing the internet. They have health data. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to find and hear and be able to see the videos at the recording studio and see Mr. Demons taking steps. Lo and behold, look at the health activity data, a pedometer, a step counter, that's what it is. 70 steps. Then you're going to see at 4:02 a.m. another 70 steps.
Down to the flipping steps.
Then at 4:42, the time frame in which he's sending that drop pin to 4:53 a.m., you're going to see 1,397 steps. You will see this data showing the defendant had the phone and was using it.
And so all this data from the phone is just a treasure trove for the prosecution of data, right? It's also really, let's say he didn't have his phone with him and it was somewhere and it was inactive for a while. That can be just as powerful.
So, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that I have to prove is the defendant committed the crime. And to do that, the state intends to show the evidence that the phone was there at the murder scene. And there were no other phones there. There is no one else out there at 4 in the morning. So to do that, the state has to convince each and every one of you that this was the phone of the defendant. You'll see in the messages and the contents of those messages him identifying himself. This is Melly, giving out that phone number to multiple people as being his phone number, 772-713-9807. And to further prove that, the state is going to show you the Instagram, the Facebook, the Snapchat. Because contrary to popular belief, Snapchat doesn't disappear. And detectives were able to write a search warrant and get contents of Snapchat.
So whether you have Snapchat and you think it's gone, it ain't gone. Whether you have a picture on your phone, you thought you deleted it, it's not gone. Everything is permanent. A lot more permanent than you might think it is.
And there are things that are there, and there are things that are not. And so, ladies and gentlemen, specifically, the Instagram, the defendant, during the course of the months of October of 2018 through December of 2018, gives out his phone number 15 times. Says, "This is me," and all during the same time frame of October 26th of 2018, he's giving out that phone number.
And isn't that hearsay? No, it's not hearsay, because if he's giving it out, it's a statement of a defendant or a statement of a party opponent.
So one of the other elements that you heard about initially was that this was committed by a criminal gang member in furtherance of a criminal gang. So what you will learn from the evidence.
The reason that's important, the crime for the benefit of the gang, is because that is what they are relying on for the death penalty. So in order for them to get the death penalty, they have to prove that one of the enhancements, and the enhancement that they're using here is it's a crime for the benefit of a gang.
From the Instagram, from the private messages, was that Jamel Demons is a member of the G Shine Blood set. This is not a stage personality.
So let's just back up just a second so you can see what this trial is going to encompass. Forensics, obviously. Police work, obviously. Testimony of co-defendant, YNW Borland. You've got cell phone experts. And now you've got gang experts.
This is not an actor that's playing a character. This was his real life. Ladies and gentlemen, you will see that as soon as October 24th, 2 days before the homicide, Jamel Demons is learning the oath of loyalty to the G-Shine Blood set. You're going to see things in these messages that will be indicative of blood membership. For example, anytime a word would normally be spelled with a C, as in Charlie, they don't use that. They replace it with the letter B. So instead of saying, I'm at the crib, they say, I'm at the brib. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Because C is associated with cribs. B is for bloods. So if you look
That's why you have YNW Borland, not Cortland.
through all the messages, you will notice time and time again, Jamel Demons is dropping C's and using B's. And you're going to see pictures, you're going to see videos of the defendant doing something called stacking, which is a way to show a gang affiliation and to broadcast it to the world. And this is not just in music videos. This is not just in lyrics, because we're not going to get into that. That's artistic expression.
Wow, that's artistic expression. So they're not going to use murder on my mind, murder on my mind. I got murder on my mind.
That's not why we are here today. We are here because the defendant murdered 2 individuals. So in summary, the last thing I want to tell you that the evidence will show is that in the Instagram, because the defendant had a moderate social media following at the time of these events,
Moderate.
people are reaching out to him. Some fans, some friends, some associates. You'll see on October 26th, after about 8 a.m. in the morning, Eastern time, multiple messages are coming in. Messages are coming in from individuals checking to see if he's okay, if he's been injured in this drive-by. If it's true that Anthony Williams, who's also sometimes referred to as Sack, and Chris Thomas, who is referred to as Juvie, are really dead. One individual, and specifically, sends out, and I want to quote the message exactly that you will hear, and says, right after this, yo homie, you good? Let me know something. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is where context matters. What does that mean? If you work at Google and you say, my whole floor is coding, that's a good thing. If you work at Broward General Hospital and you say, my whole floor is coding, that is a bad thing. The context around the messages matters. So in the context of this message, this individual is reaching out, asking if Mr. Demons is good, after he's been tagged in multiple social media posts about this drive-through, this shooting. And Mr. Demmons responds very succinctly, "I did that." Shh. Ladies and gentlemen, at the conclusion of the evidence, the state is confident that you will find the defendant guilty as charged of the first-degree murder of Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams. Thank you.
All right, so I did. That's powerful for her to wind up the opening with "I did that" in the context. So, but one thing I didn't hear her talk about is how this was related to gang activity. The fact that he's a gang member, so what? This has to be for the benefit of the gang. And how did this benefit the gang? She did not touch on that at all. So this has just been part one of our reaction to the opening statements for YNW Melly. Part two will come next, and we'll analyze the defense. We'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts. I'm Bruce Rivers with our content genius, Michael Rivers, as always, behind the camera and behind all the ideas on our channel. We got to give him a shout out and give him the credit where credit is due. Also, a shout out to Jaylap and Percy Mac for our intro and outro. So make sure you sign up for Patreon, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. We'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts.
Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. 23-hour lockdown, police is at my goal.